With the first calendar year of the Nintendo Switch 2's life wrapping up, I think it's pretty obvious now that Nintendo fully intends on extending the lifespan of every single one of their games by not only keeping them at full price, but also doing their best to extend the time period between game launches in order to ensure that anytime somebody decides to come into the ecosystem, they'll only have a single option and they'll have to pay full price for it. For example, Super Mario Odyssey came out in 2017, and now we are entering 2026, and still, until this day, if somebody decides to join the Nintendo ecosystem, whether it's with a Switch 1 or a Switch 2, and they happen to have been a 3D Mario fan in a previous life, their one and only option is to buy Super Mario Odyssey and buy it at full price unless they happen to jump in on a convenient time where they might save themselves 15 or 20 bucks. The benefit of limiting the amount of releases that Nintendo does during these console generations is it keeps people on their toes. It keeps them excited, it keeps them committed, and most importantly, it keeps them subscribed. We've seen this from Nintendo over time, but we mostly saw it with the classic titles. They've had all of their virtual console games ready to go throughout the lifespan of the Wii and the Wii U, but they insisted on slowly dishing out those games because they know if they just give everybody an entire library or give them too many games to choose from, they're less likely to buy all of those games at once, whereas if they were to stretch them out and release a game once every 1 or 2 months and give the players no other options, it makes them more likely to buy a B or C tier title because it's not competing with anything. This model, of course, continued on with the Nintendo Switch Online, where even until this day, some major Nintendo 64 hitters like Super Smash Bros., for example, have still not been released on Nintendo Switch Online, despite the Nintendo 64 being available for quite a few years now. And likewise, we've seen this already with the inclusion of the Nintendo GameCube for Nintendo Switch Online. And somehow that's even worse because early on during the time of the Nintendo Direct, Nintendo showcased a catalog of games, gaslighting people into thinking that they were going to be jumping into the GameCube and having a pretty good solid lineup of games ready to go right off the bat. And we've seen some of the most popular games on that list that they showcased still not make it out, with the drip feed continuing on in full force. Like I said, it's a means to keep people subscribed. It's a way to conveniently reuse the same content that you've been doing over and over again, minimizing all costs available, and profiting as much as possible with as little as effort as needed. It would be like a YouTuber talking about the same thing over and over again and just wording it a different way to keep people enticed. Nobody likes that. You shouldn't do that. The thing is, with all of this drip feeding and extending the life between game launches, I think we all started seeing it happen during the life of the Switch 1. But especially in the early years of the Nintendo Switch 1, many people were very much blinded by what was going on, because Nintendo Wii U releases were very much padding out the schedules. But as far as Nintendo's concerned, financially speaking, and as far as the masses that are not gaming enthusiasts like you and I are concerned, somebody might jump into the Nintendo Switch 2 this year, and they might have been a Donkey Kong fan from a long time ago, and in their minds they'd be like, this is awesome. Not only do I have a 3D Donkey Kong game that came out this year, there are also 2 different 2D Donkey Kong games that Nintendo made for the Nintendo Switch. But obviously, Nintendo has not made a 2D Donkey Kong game since February of 2014, which was the initial release of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. But the casual gaming community does not realize that. That 2014 title is still selling for $60 on the Nintendo eShop, by the way, which is more expensive than it was on the Wii U. As we got towards the midlife of the Nintendo Switch, I think a lot of people expected that Nintendo had to slow down a little bit because of a worldwide pandemic. And perhaps it was valid for a while, and maybe even excusable. Just like it might have been excusable that due to the pandemic, it's why they decided to not decrease the price of the original Switch, or cement that they would not be doing any form of program like the Nintendo Selects, or dropping the price of any of their software. Keep in mind, during the pandemic is when people started to realize that this was the new reality of Nintendo. From 2017 until 2020, as far as most of us were concerned, it was just going to be a regular Nintendo cycle. They'd have the strong first 2 or 3 years, and they would continue to release titles, they would drop the prices accordingly. But amongst the commotion of a worldwide pandemic, and amongst the insane releases of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, the narrative around Nintendo's prices started to become a little bit more clear, and the releases between their games also started to become a little bit more clear. Many of the negative images that we see with the Switch 2 today happened during the last 5 years. But despite that, it was easy for a lot of people to ignore because through the first half of those 5 years, it was the pandemic, and through the second half of those 5 years, basically from mid-2022 until now, the eyes and brains of every Nintendo fan was set already for the launch of the next console, the Switch 2. It was a very slow end to the Nintendo Switch 1's life, but the excuse that many of us had told ourselves, the understanding was that all of this waiting would become worth it with the launch of the Switch 2, whenever that happens. And people expected an all-star lineup. And no matter how much enthusiasts like to pretend that there is an all-star lineup already released for the Switch 2, the reality is once the enthusiasts that decided to adopt it got out of the way, the casual market did not pick it up, and that's a very big part of the reason why the Switch 2 is struggling in the holiday season. And it's also a very big reason why so many Switch 2s are sitting on their shelves and collecting dust. Because even the gamers that decided to adopt and buy early, though many of them that are not Nintendo enthusiasts and they just had a Nintendo Switch to play some first-party titles, they realized pretty quickly into the Switch 2's life that they were not getting any of those major titles that they expected, except for maybe Bonanza. And you don't actually have to go back that far. From the April Direct, Nintendo showcased pretty much every single game that was going to be coming out in 2025. And very much so, without a doubt, because we were all there and we heard the conversations and we watched the videos of people and we read all of the comments and the discussions online, the very clear assumption was that by the time we got to June, there would be a Direct announcing more games that would come out through the end of 2025. And then July happened, still no Direct. And then August happened, still no Direct. I mean, there was some indie stuff and some third-party stuff, but, I mean, people are just going to buy those games on another console if they want. And most people do, obviously. And then if you remember all of the hype and the lead up to the September Direct, the assumption was that we were finally going to find out what the big holiday titles were. And keep in mind, before that September 12th Direct, we already knew about Metroid Prime 4, we knew about Hyrule Warriors, and we knew about Kirby Air Riders. The people wanted more. And the best that they got was Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 for $70. Which means that outside of Mario Kart, all of the best-selling franchises for the Nintendo Switch 2 remain in the same void of wonder in the minds of the fandom as they've been in for at least the last 5 years. Think about it. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate came out back in 2018. It's been 7 years since that game, and Sakurai just released Kirby Air Riders, so it's gonna be a long time until a sequel for that one comes out, barring some miracle. I've already mentioned Mario Odyssey. It's been over 8 years since that game came out. Even Animal Crossing is approaching 6 years. And depending on how much you view Tears of the Kingdom as its own adventure, we haven't had something groundbreaking and original like a new Zelda title since Breath of the Wild back in 2017. That's obviously as far as the major 3D Zeldas go. And I say that as somebody that enjoyed Tears of the Kingdom and enjoyed it on the original Switch and didn't mind that Nintendo had re-released basically a better version of Breath of the Wild as far as I was concerned. But despite my affinity for that game, it's very clear to me how much was reused for that title. And part of me is okay with that. I would have gladly taken a mid-gen Mario Odyssey sequel that was built off of the same engine. I love Mario Galaxy 2, and that was basically built off of Galaxy 1. Majora's Mask was built off of Ocarina of Time's engine. To an extent, I'm okay with these sequels, but I'm okay with them as stopgaps. But unfortunately, seeing that Tears of the Kingdom was released in 2022, I have very little hope that Nintendo is going to be releasing a 3D Zelda anytime soon. Maybe not even until 2029. Because the issue is that we view these games very differently to how Nintendo views them. So for example, Animal Crossing is about to get a major update. This has caused Animal Crossing sales to explode. It's doing very well over the past few months with minimal cost and effort on Nintendo's side. That just extended the life of Animal Crossing and brought in so many more sales for that game. It's great for business, but for fans of Animal Crossing that are waiting for a sequel and looking for the next title, they're basically going to be playing Switch 1's Animal Crossing for the foreseeable future. This is the same issue with Switch 2 edition games. You and I may view Zelda Tears of the Kingdom as the last 3D Zelda title, but as far as the shareholders are concerned, as far as the game releases are concerned, as far as everybody is concerned on Nintendo's end, on the business side of things, because of the huge bump in sales the Switch 2 edition games are receiving, the mindset is that there are already 2 3D Zelda titles available from day one on the Switch 2, those being Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Effectively, the Switch 2 launched with people paying $80 for one of them and $70 for the other one, or they got a whole load of people dropping $20 to upgrade and get a better frame rate and use an app. Minimal effort, low costs, and high profits. You and I may view Super Mario Bros. Wonder as a game that released in 2023, or Kirby and the Forgotten Land and Super Mario Party Jamboree as games that released in 2024. But no, those are launch titles for the Switch 2. The same way that Breath of the Wild was a launch title for the Nintendo Switch 1. The same way that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was not a Wii U game, it was a Switch game. Because if they're able to increase the profit margins by selling fewer units, but also having fewer costs, the profit margins could very much still be similar to what releasing a new game would bring them. And this allows them to continue to extend the life of every single one of these games, as well as keeping people subscribed to their subscriptions. And the issue is with many of these games, the time and effort that's being put in is not translating to quality out on the actual game. Pokemon Legends ZA got 3 years after Scarlet and Violet was released. The understanding was by them increasing the time span between releases, the quality would be there. But if you told me that Pokemon Legends ZA came out 3 months after Scarlet and Violet, I would have believed you. This is no doubt Nintendo's tried and true wisdom leaking down into Game Freaks. You're telling me that Mario Kart World is a game that looks like it was worked on for 11 years from the launch of Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U? I mean, most people wouldn't even think that the 5 years between Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild made any sense. We're about to get Mario Tennis fever. It's coming out 8 years since the last Mario Tennis title. The gap between the previous one was 3 years. The one before that, another 3 years. But now for anybody that's committed to Mario Tennis, finally, after 8 years, they're getting their sequel, but it's not going to be a sequel worthy of 8 years of waiting. Even with these games getting increased lifespans through DLC and updates, which, let's be real, is just withheld content that should have been released with the launch of those games. Even with that additional support that doesn't take that much effort on Nintendo's end, the gaps between releases are way too long and the ends do not justify the means. The quality of the titles, both in the actual effort that's put into most of these games, right, like you'll get a few of them that you can tell Nintendo rolled up its sleeves and gave you that Nintendo quality that you expect. But so many of them are starting to look like lazy ports or cheap sequels. And still you're waiting 5, 6, 7, 8 years between these titles. Put it this way, let's say you were a 10-year-old kid in 2002 and your first 3D Mario game was Super Mario Sunshine. By the time you were 21, so an 11-year window, you got to play Super Mario Sunshine, you got to play Mario Galaxy 1, Mario Galaxy 2, Mario 3D Land, and Super Mario 3D World. And you got to enjoy them when they were brand new and fresh on the market, and were tailor-made for the console that you bought them for. That's an 11-year window, 2002 to 2013. If you were 10 when Super Mario Odyssey came out, you'll be lucky if by 2027, when you're 20 years old, you might finally get a sequel to 3D Mario. But again, that's not how Nintendo thinks about it, because as far as they're concerned, their last 3D Mario game was not Mario Odyssey. In their minds, they released 3D All-Stars in 2020, they released 3D World, that was the last game, and it came packed in with a 4-hour Bowser's Fury. So as far as Nintendo's concerned, if somebody started off with Super Mario Odyssey, after that they got to play 3D All-Stars, and then they got to play Bowser's Fury and 3D World in 2021, and now they get Galaxy 1 and 2 in 2025. But the problem is, outside of the little side adventure of Bowser's Fury, all of these are just ports of old games. They are not titles that are freshly tailor-made for the console that you bought them on. And they're lazy ports, not even like good effort major remakes and remasters. Think about all of the discourse online when Bowser's Fury came out. Remember, everybody was talking about how the next major 3D Mario game is just around the corner, and it's clearly going to be built off of what we saw in Bowser's Fury. Anybody would have put money that the next 3D Mario title would be coming out before the end of the Switch 1's life. And then when they saw that it was like 2023 and 24, and we still haven't gotten it yet, they would have put money that it was going to be a launch title for the Switch 2. But no, they don't need to. Instead, they just release Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 as a package for $70, and now whatever 3D Mario title that they probably have completed already and stored in a vault ready to go when sales get slow can sit in that vault until they need to release a big major title. Okay, that last part might be a little bit of a conspiracy. Although it's not as much of a conspiracy as you might think. We even saw with the launch of the Switch 2 that Nintendo was willing to delay the launch of that console despite it already being finished and ready to go probably for over a year. All because they needed to milk every last penny that they can get out of the life of the Switch 1 before jumping ship to the Switch 2, where they could in turn start to milk every penny that they can get from that one. This is how they manage to keep a steady stream of releases. And this is also why so much of what they release feels lazy and outdated. Genuinely, when was the last time Nintendo released a technical marvel? Or something that looked like it justified everything that people were waiting for? Like, Bonanza looks cool, but it's not 2025 groundbreaking new console cool. Metroid Prime 4 for the Switch 1, for example. The Switch 1 version of that actually looks like it's punching well above its weight because it's a Switch 1 game. But the Switch 2 version, it's not like a technical marvel for 2025 standards by any means, even by Nintendo standards. Gosh, looking at this list of games, you might have to go all the way back to like Tears of the Kingdom, and that game ran choppy and was just built off of Breath of the Wild, which that was the technical marvel. Kirby and the Forgotten Land was a big one, but For 2022, I don't know, man. Like, arguably the last big showcases that Nintendo had released that were showcases of quality and level design, and even though the technology was weaker, it still like really stood out, may have actually been Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, and more so Breath of the Wild, especially considering that's a Wii U game. And I'm not saying that the technical aspect of games is the most important, but the reality is these technical advancements in gaming, those are the justifications or the excuses as to why games are more expensive now and why development time takes so much longer and why there's such a big gap between titles. Nintendo fans are like, well, look at Sony and what they're releasing on the PS5. It's like, yeah, if the Nintendo Switch 2 and the games of the Nintendo Switch 2 had the top-of-the-line high-end hardware, I would understand it. But on a good day, the Switch 2 is the equivalent of a PlayStation 4 Pro. That's old technology now, which means Nintendo should be able to deliver games of at least PS4 quality at a faster rate than what was released on the PS4, because back then it was top-of-the-line high-tech stuff. And likewise, when they were on the original Switch and they were releasing games that were just better than like the PS3 and Xbox 360, because of the advancements in technology, they should have been able to keep up with a much better delivery rate than we saw. Weaker and outdated hardware should be easier to deliver for, and it should be a lot more affordable to do so. It's the same reason why handheld games that were coming out on the DS and the 3DS and on the Game Boy Advance were able to be developed and released at a much quicker rate, because those handheld consoles were the equivalent of last-gen weaker consoles, sometimes even 2 gens weaker, which is supposed to yield to a much quicker and healthier output. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing the quality of those handheld titles released for a full price on a home console, and they're pointing at the prices of the games for the PS5 and the development of the PS5 and the highest tech modern game releases, and trying to equate games that would have run on a base PS4 to that as a justification as to why development times have increased and the cost of these things has increased as well. Honestly, Nintendo should just change its punchline to Nintendo having your cake and eating it too, because that's what they're doing. They are literally providing the budget experience with premium prices and premium expectations. But honestly, it's starting to become clear as to why people did not buy into this console yet. And it's very clear as to why this holiday was not doing well. Nintendo got very arrogant this year, not only with their greed and their prices, but with their overconfidence that with a lackluster 2025 lineup, people would just fall in line and buy the console no matter what. And maybe at first, that's what the signs were showing that people would do. But it was very obvious, especially from the September Direct, that this thing was not going to have a good holiday, because Nintendo got overconfident in their B-tier titles. And the reality is people are still, until now, waiting for either a Breath of the Wild or a Mario Odyssey. And we are approaching 9 years since those came out. Hopefully it's not another 9 years until we see something of equivalent value for the Nintendo Switch 2. And for the love of God, can you increase the output of Nintendo 64 games and GameCube games on Nintendo Switch Online?